Well, lately there seems to be a unity fight between Alberta and the rest of Canada with the threat of tariffs dangling over the country and our premier securing the Alberta-Montana border. She's also encouraging other premiers to get on board with this because it might be the only action that avoids tariffs. So to discuss all of this, all of what's happening in Alberta between tariffs, plus announcements about utilities and daycare, not to mention a COVID-19 report, I'm going to bring in Tyler Dawson. He is the legislative reporter with the National Post. Tyler, welcome back. So much to talk about this week.
It is the news year has started off with a bang.
It sure has. Okay, so firstly, Canada now has avoided tariffs on its exports to the U.S. for at least 30 days, right? So the announcement made on Monday after a pair of phone calls between the Prime Minister and U.S. President Donald Trump. And so had the tariffs gone into effect on Tuesday as expected, people are saying that it could have had devastating consequences for the Alberta economy. But our Premier, Danielle Smith, had a different take on the issue. So what did she do and how did she react, Tyler?
Well, so Danielle Smith has been on this sort of hearts and minds campaign for weeks, months, really, actually, meeting with her counterparts in the United States, whether that's governors, Congress people. She of course, made an appearance at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's Palm Beach resort, a couple weeks ago. She's sort of been all over, sort of campaigning against the imposition of tariffs, engaging in what she's calling diplomacy. She's been really big on the idea that there's a diplomatic solution to this problem, that this is not a case where retaliatory tariffs or shutting off energy exports or something like that are going to free Canada from this tariff threat. And as you alluded to, the border does seem to have sort of been the thing that did it. Following the phone calls between Trump and Trudeau on Monday, Canada had announced all this stuff actually weeks and weeks ago, such as a $1.3 billion border security plan and things like that. Whether Trump thinks those things happened because of him, I have no idea. But at any rate, the border seems to be the thing that has avoided this for now. From the Alberta perspective, Smith is crediting her diplomatic campaign with so the original tariff was supposed to be 25% across all goods coming from Canada. When it was announced last weekend, it was a 10% tariff on energy exports, which of course would have included a lot of Alberta oil and gas. And Smith is crediting her diplomacy with that reduced rate for some of those products. So we don't obviously know what's going to happen at the end of this 30-day period, but the Alberta government's been big on diplomacy and they don't show any signs of slowing down on that front.
Mm-hmm. So she felt like it was a small victory there on their part. All right. Well, so of course we were talking about this 30-day reprieve on tariffs, but it hasn't stopped Alberta's diplomatic efforts, obviously. So there are several ministers and MLAs currently or recently abroad. So what does Alberta's diplomatic effort look like right now, Tyler?
Mm-hmm. Let's start with the person who's wrapped up. Todd Loewen was in Germany for a hunting show to sort of pitch Alberta's hunting and tourism economy to the Germans. And this was also in advance of an auction that's happening in a couple weeks in Salt Lake City around special hunting licenses. So trying to get Germans down to Salt Lake City to bid on some of these special licenses. So he wrapped that up, I think, on Tuesday, maybe. Yesterday, I believe it was, there were 3 ministers who flew down to Washington for the National Prayer Breakfast. I believe it was Adriana LaGrange, Dan Williams, and I think Nathan Newdorf was the 3rd. So they're down there for the National Prayer Breakfast, big annual event in Washington, and they're going to be meeting with Congress people and things like that. Then you have 2 other MLAs whose names are suddenly escaping me. I think Shane Getson and who's the other one? It doesn't matter, I guess. They're down in Oregon. They're in Salem, Oregon for sort of a Pacific state sort of meeting. It's a nonprofit organization that puts on this big event every year. So they're down there talking about partnerships between Alberta and the Pacific, northwestern sort of Pacific U.S. states. Of course, actually, a lot of Alberta oil ends up down there. The Trans Mountain pipeline that runs out to Burnaby, BC, actually forks down to the south and feeds refineries in Washington and Oregon and California as well. So lots going on there. Then there's Rebecca Schultz, who's in Japan right now, and she's not there, as far as I'm aware, to go skiing. Although if you follow any professional skiers or snowboarders on social media, you will know that Japan has like 15 feet of snow right now, and the skiing's incredible. But anyway, she is there to talk about Canada or Alberta's trading relationship with Japan, talking about energy, talking about our environmental record, all those sorts of things. So that's where she is. I think that's everyone who's abroad right now, although Danielle Smith is also expecting to go back to the United States, back to Washington next week as part of this delegation from all of Canada's premiers to meet with lawmakers in Washington. She's also going, I believe, at the end of the month to the National Governors Association, I think is what it's called, to meet with state governors from around the United States. So huge diplomatic push happening in Alberta right now on a variety of fronts. You know, we've got hunting, we've got engagement in Japan, we've got the northwestern U.S. states, and we've got people down in Washington. So a ton going on the diplomatic front from Alberta politicians right now.
Oh, sounds like it. Okay, so switching gears here, Take Back Alberta. Now, this is the conservative activist group headed by David Parker. They've been fined more than $100,000 by Elections Alberta. So apparently they ran afoul of election rules. So what exactly happened there, Tyler?
Yeah, so there's all kinds of rules around bookkeeping and donation accounting and financial reporting and spending rules during an election campaign. There's all sorts of rules that exist for groups that are involved in the Alberta political scene. And those are the rules sort of fundamentally that Take Back Alberta ran afoul of. Now, people will probably remember Take Back Alberta from mainly probably the campaign actually to get Danielle Smith elected as leader of the United Conservative Party after Jason Kenney resigned. It became this sort of quite powerful grassroots for sort of capitalizing on some of the anger after the pandemic, capitalizing on some of the concerns over Alberta's energy industry, brought a lot of new people into the United Conservative Party fold. It's also been quite controversial, frankly, in political circles and in circles on the left that don't like the views of this group. But they ran afoul of these laws that we just discussed. And David Parker, the head of the group, has personally been fined. I think it's about $7,500. So a pretty hefty legal bill for that group. It's unclear what the future might look like for them following the levying of these fines. So I guess we'll wait and see on that front. But a pretty significant crackdown, so to speak, on what was at one point a very major player in Alberta political circles.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned the controversy there, and also controversial, this recently released report from the Alberta government, the province's COVID-19 response. This was highly controversial. So the task force that wrote the report was led by Dr. Gary Davidson, a Red Deer doctor, right? And he's argued in the past that COVID numbers were inflated to justify public health restrictions. So when the task force was announced, Danielle Smith said that she wanted contrarian opinions, and well, I guess she got them then, didn't she, Tyler?
She certainly did. Yeah. This was really controversial even in the beginning. And as you say, Smith was asked directly about this. She said she wanted views from people who'd sort of been shouted down during the pandemic. And this was bound to lead to some controversial outcomes. The report, for example, argued that there should have been more leeway for Alberta doctors to prescribe some off-label medications, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, two medications that were talked about a lot during the pandemic, but that were not sort of shown to be beneficial, particularly in treating COVID-19. There was talk in the report of ending COVID-19 vaccinations for youth. Things like that. It really caught the attention of the medical community for sure. They simply said, look, this is completely offside with where the science is right now. This was a report with conclusions looking for evidence, that sort of thing. And it's put Premier Danielle Smith in a little bit of a tough spot. One of the things that was a challenge for her leading into the 2023 election was the perception among Albertans that she was sort of part of this fringe, I guess you could say, on COVID-19 that was, vaccine hesitant and was concerned about public health measures and those sorts of things. And that probably harmed her election efforts in 2023, even though she won. Since then, she's, I think, tried to govern largely in the mainstream, on the mainstream sort of issues that are concerning Albertans. We've seen that in the fights with Ottawa. We've seen that in the defense of the oil and gas sector, those sorts of things, the sort of issues that Albertans expect from the government. Now, every time COVID rears its ugly head again, in the form of a report like this, which is something that only really the people who are still angry about COVID want to talk about. I mean, I don't think the vast majority of Albertans want to be relitigating any of these questions. It puts her in a tough spot because she gets asked about it by reporters. She says something that maybe is controversial, maybe it isn't, but she's either making some of these people mad or she's alienating a proportion of the sort of the larger Alberta electorate. So it just puts her in a sticky situation.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Just recently, the Alberta government launching an advertising campaign around electricity bills, of all things. So the province announced there will be a rate of last resort when it comes to electricity prices. And it's a little confusing, but it will be set at 12 cents per kilowatt hour and will be the rate that Albertans get if they don't choose a specific rate. So, but it apparently is not necessarily the cheapest rate, and that's why the province is launching that campaign. So, to tell people about this, so maybe can you kind of fill us in a little bit more here?
Yeah, so there's been this effort to sort of bring down electricity prices for Albertans, and so the government set this rate of last resort that's 12 cents per kilowatt hour. Basically, if you don't sign up for a specific rate or you forget to renew or whatever, they're going to stick you on that rate instead of you getting stuck at a much higher rate, for example. However, if you pay attention to what the rates look like daily, 12% or 12 cents per kilowatt hour is probably actually kind of expensive. So this campaign is basically saying, hey, don't just go with the rate of last resort. It is there to help, but it's not going to be the best deal. So this advertising campaign is really just to reach people that might otherwise not know this. Perhaps that's newcomers, perhaps that's seniors who are not regularly checking rates on the internet, on like, I don't know, the EPCOR website or something like that. So it's really just to remind people that, yeah, this exists. Yeah, it's going to be helpful. No, it's probably not the best rate. So do your own research a little bit on it. Because of course, this is meant to bring costs down for people, right? And the political consequences, if everyone ends up on the rate of last resort, they might be seeing their bills go up and they'll be mad at the government about it. So an advertising campaign probably makes a little bit of sense to raise awareness about these changes.
Other things that the government has been announcing, so parents caught off guard by new changes to the way that daycare subsidies work. So parents across the province, regardless of income, will now be paying that flat fee of more than $300. So that can be substantial for some families. But, now this means that more money is going directly to daycare so that they can then pay workers better and keep operations afloat. So, it's just another step in the the march towards cheaper daycare, but not everyone obviously is happy about this, Tyler, right?
Certainly, yeah. There are people who have seen their daycare bills go up as a result of this. There are people who will see their daycare bills go down as a result of this. It's leveling the playing field. The criticism of it is that it's essentially not means tested. In other words, your rate does not go down if you make less money or go up if you make more money. If you have a combined family income of $190,000, you're paying the same as a family with a combined income of $45,000. So that's sort of where the controversy comes into it. But it is sort of a more stable, sustainable, transparent sort of set of funding. At least that's what the government is arguing. Because, of course, there's been some controversy over the past year where daycares are saying, well, we're not making enough money under this $15 a day daycare program to keep the doors open, to pay staff, to be involved. So some have been trying to sort of leave the publicly funded daycare system and go fully private altogether to try and make a little bit of money. So that's sort of what's going on here. It's obviously made some people unhappy, but it is a step towards the sort of final, I think it's $10 a day is where it's going to end up in. I think the final date that's supposed to happen is May 2026, April 2026, something like that. So it's a step in this process. Obviously, some parents are upset. But I think probably in many ways a step that any government would be making at this point to try and get its ducks in a row as the rates continue to come down. And as you said, I think it's about $360 for a kid that's in daycare full time, and then there's a lower rate for kids. I think it's about 130 or 170 or something like that for those who are not in daycare full time. You can probably tell that I don't have kids. I only know the price for dog daycare, I'm afraid.
Well, hopefully it's cheaper than that.
It's actually not, but such is life.
Of course.
Give me $10 a day dog daycare, and I'll vote for whatever party.
Wouldn't that be perfect? All right. We don't have a lot of time left, but really quickly, Alberta announced a new investment body to build the Heritage Savings Trust Fund to $250 billion. So with, of course, it could be eased off of revenue resources and financing its budget, mostly from interest from that fund. So what does the plan look like exactly?
Yeah, this is actually a slightly old plan. Premier Danielle Smith sort of first announced this, I think, like 2 years ago, and they're now just maybe sort of putting in the pieces to get this where it needs to go. The idea is basically that when the Heritage Savings Trust Fund was started in 1976, if it had never been raided, if it had never been money been withdrawn to pay the bills, if money had kept going in, we could basically run the province off of the interest generated from that fund. So what's happening here basically is there's going to be a new investment body. I think it's being given $2 billion worth of seed funding, and it's going to invest it. It's going to invest it more aggressively than the Heritage Savings Trust Fund is managed. It's still going to be arm's length from the government, but it is basically looking to generate maximum returns from that money, which can then be put into the Heritage Savings Trust Fund to grow that quicker than the government setting aside X billion dollars every year to try and grow that fund. So that's what's going on there. How long it'll take, how well it'll work, who knows? But that's what the government's plan is at any rate.
Well, Tyler, it looks like we're out of time here, but thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate you stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
Tyler Dawson is the legislative reporter with the National Post.